Kia kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Karatiana, for the warm invitation to provide this seminar. So, as you heard, my name's Angela, and this presentation is going to explore how we can uphold dignity, care, and relational accountability when forensic technologies are generating new forms of digital data from the deceased. As forensic science evolves, we're increasingly working with digital images, 3D models and reconstructions, and those representations of people who have passed. This presentation is going to explore that these aren't just data files. They carry whakapapa, identity, and relational responsibilities. I'm here today to share insights from Māori experts who have generously offered their korero on how tikanga and Māori data sovereignty principles can guide ethical futures for forensic practice. I'm going to just briefly begin by grounding myself properly in this virtual space. Ko auraki te monga te ruane tākou na ko. Ko waitaki te awa e mahiane aku ma harahara. Ko a tākou te kaiaka I noho neo, e mihi ana ki a kaitahu, ko ka iwi o tini urohe. Ko whenua o tōku whānau I Ingarangi me Airangi, I tipu ake au ki Bristol, Tiamana me Yorkshire anō hoki. He kotahi taku tamahine ko Santia tona ingoa, I waru onu tau e nai nei. He uri ia ko kaitahu, ka te mamoi me waitaha, he punu araha, he puna maramatanga.
Right?
Ko
Yeah.
ia
Oh,
te
what?
ahi
I take that. That goes in your radio.
Yeah, yeah.
mō tēnei rangahau. Ko Angela Clark toko ingoa. So my pepeha is not just an introduction to myself, but it situates me also as tawiwi in Otago, raising my daughter who carries kaitahu whakapapa, and it's important for me to acknowledge the whenua and the iwi whose rohe I live and work within, and recognise that this kaupapa I'm speaking to today sits within all of those relationships. So this project was shaped in collaboration with a deeply knowledgeable research team and with the guidance of Māori experts who have shared their insights with generosity and trust. Their korero grounds everything that we'll be presenting to you today. So I'm grateful for Sam, Karetiana, Annabelle, and Heidi who have worked together on this project, and very much grateful for the research assistance by Tia Mai Hare. The project was funded by a University of Otago research grant, and ethical approval for the interviews that you'll hear from was granted. A very brief but important disclaimer. There's some images in the presentation that are illustrative, and they come from open source repositories overseas. There's no images of koiwi tangata or tupapaku from Aotearoa in this presentation. And for the safety of everybody involved, all participant korero has been anonymized. This presentation has been recorded, so please refrain from taking any screenshots because it will be available online to browse again at your leisure. So, ko waia ho, who am I? A little bit about myself to ground me within this talk, but also to share with you some of the experiences that I've dealt with in my professional career to bring us to this place on this research journey. So as I mentioned, I grew up in England and Germany, but I mainly stayed in the north of England and did a undergraduate and postgraduate in forensics, and particularly specializing in forensic anthropology. So from the age of about 16, I found my vocation and my calling in the remains of people who have passed, and wanted to create a life for myself where I could read those stories and share that work. So when I did my master's, human osteology and paleopathology, it's just a fancy way of saying human bones and diseases. After I did my university education in the UK, I took a gap year, or an OE, and I lined up 2 major archaeological investigations where I worked with local people and overseas universities in looking at human remains from those sites. The first was in Peru and the second was in Thailand. The one in Thailand was run at the time by the University of Otago, which led me here to do my PhD in biological anthropology, and that's where I've stayed. Currently, I'm a lecturer and academic coordinator of the Forensic Biology Summer School at the University of Otago. But soon after my appointment as lecturer, I got involved in forensic casework, and in 2015 started a consultation service where I work with the Crown agencies and independent in agencies in looking at human bones. That work has led on to two significant projects that I've been very honoured to be part of, that have really enhanced and embedded tikanga within the way that I do my work. The first was working on a repatriation mission, Operation Te Auraki, for the New Zealand Defence Force in 2018. And the second was with Runanga up in Kaikoura, with the rebuilding of State Highway 1 following the earthquakes there in 2018. So those work was a lived, both pieces of those work were a lived experience of how we can work tikanga and a kaupapa Māori aligned approach within to forensic science, and really with an impetus to doing research in this space. In 2019, I was called to court to give expert testimony on a homicide investigation with very complex skeletal trauma and the main questions around how the individual died. When I was in court presenting images and sketches of the deceased, it occurred to me that it would be a really important way to explain scientific evidence in an easy way for the jury and judge to understand if I had some form of 3D model, either rotating on a screen in the courtroom or a physical 3D model, which I could show in the courtroom setting. Given the work that I've just been doing, embodying tikanga within my work, my first question was to pause and to say, well, yeah, from a scientific perspective, this could enhance the way that we communicate information, but should we be doing it? And if we can do this, how do we do this in a way that is tika and ponu? And that's really where this research began. So forensic science is changing rapidly. Technologies such as 3D CT scanning, virtual autopsies, 3D scanning reconstructions, digital modeling, and AI algorithms are creating entirely new forms of data about the deceased. Currently, these technologies are not readily presented in courts or really used in Aotearoa, but these technologies are rising rapidly overseas and being presented in overseas courtrooms. So now is the time to pause, to take stock and ask, what are the implications of using these new forms of data here within our place? So in Te Ao Māori, anything derived from a person, which in my opinion and within this research includes digital data from that individual, can be understood as tonga. And when something is tonga, it carries whakapapa, and it comes with responsibilities of care, dignity, and protection. So the Māori Data Sovereignty Network, Te Mana Raruranga, describes data as a living tonga with strategic value to Māori. This means that digital remains are never just information. They hold relationships, identity, and connections that continue beyond death. If we treat these materials simply as files or images or data sets or data frameworks, we risk stripping away tapu and severing those relational ties. But when we recognize them as tonga, new and important questions emerge. So who are the kaitiaki of the data from the tūpapaku, the deceased? Whose authority applies? And what safeguards are needed to ensure digital representations of tūpapaku are handled with integrity and respect? In 2022, the Supreme Court's decision in Ellis versus the Crown recognise tikanga as a freestanding source of law, not an optional cultural value, but a binding part of Aotearoa's legal framework. The court affirmed that mana, tapu, and reputation endure beyond death. That recognition has enormous implications for forensic science, because if tikanga applies to both the living and the dead, it must also apply to the data derived from the deceased. So this decision from the Supreme Court was a major catalyst for this research project. It signaled that tikanga values aren't peripheral. They must inform how forensic technologies are developed, governed, and practiced. So despite the pace of technological change, we currently have no legislation, policy, or overarching operational guidelines specifically for handling digital data from the deceased. We have the Human Tissues Act, which focuses on the physical remains. We have current data sovereignty frameworks that cover living people and populations and data from them. And we also have the Digital Strategy for Aotearoa 2022, which identifies Indigenous rights and data governance as critical, but does not provide mechanisms for any data derived post-mortem or in forensic investigations. Forensic data is largely governed by default by Crown Authority, which by its nature creates uncertainty and purported risk for Māori. As forensic data by nature is sensitive and personal, the absence of a Māori cultural lens poses challenges in maintaining ethics and promoting equity. So the aim of this research was simple but important: to explore tikanga Māori and Māori data sovereignty principles and how they can guide respectful, ethical practice when new technologies create digital representations of tūpapaku. To do this, we used a kaupapa Māori aligned qualitative approach and carried out semi-structured interviews with Māori experts working across data governance, digital technology, tikanga, museum care, and cultural advisory roles. Their perspectives were not uniform, and that diversity matters because, as will be heard in the rest of the presentation, tikanga especially is contextual, relational, dynamic, and defined differently across iwi, hapu, and whānau. The framework in the illustration here shows the core considerations that we discussed within the interviews: questions of personhood, cultural and ethical safety, and obligations to whānau and whakapapa. We analyse these korero through reflective thematic analysis through a tikanga-informed lens, centering relationships, reciprocity, and participant meaning. Across the interviews, 3 interwoven themes emerged. Now, these themes don't sit in isolation. They come and join together, reflecting the relational nature of the korero. Participants spoke not only about data management, but about deeper questions of trust, cultural safety, and the responsibility we carry when creating digital representations of tūpapaku. The first theme, highlighted in green, highlights how trust and the legacy of colonization continue to influence how Māori engage with forensic and digital systems. The second in grey reframes data as tonga, carrying whakapapa, tapu, and tikanga-based obligations. And the third in teal looks ahead. Mana motuhake, capability, and the futures of partnership, pointing to who should lead, decide, and act. Together, these themes offer a foundation for rethinking forensic governance in a way that upholds dignity, recognizes relational accountability, and supports culturally grounded decision-making. What I'm going to do now is I'll walk you through each of them in turn, using the participants' own words to highlight the insights that they've shared. The first theme centers on trust, safety, and the ongoing impacts of colonizations. Participants described uncertainty, fear, and historical harm as continuing to shape how Māori engage with digital and forensic data systems. particularly when those systems lack transparency or meaningful relational grounding. Within this theme, 4 interconnected ideas emerge. System opacity and understanding. Participants spoke about unclear processes, limited access to information, and differing worldviews around data. These uncertainties make it difficult to access safety or to build trust. Fear, vulnerability, and intergenerational impact. What might appear as resistance from the outside is often a rational response to risk, shaped by past experiences, institutional inequities, and the intergenerational impacts of harm. Colonization as a present-day influence. Historical trauma continues to affect Māori experienced data practices today, influencing trust in institutions, expectations of care, and perceptions of authority. And trust requires relationships, not policy. Participants emphasize that real safety doesn't come from procedural safeguards alone. It comes from whakapapa-based relationships, shared values, and genuine partnerships with hapori Māori. So the quotes now bring these themes to life and show how these issues are experienced in practice. The first quote highlights the need for clear communication and transparency. Without accessible information, Whānau can't meaningfully participate in decisions or give informed consent, which immediately undermines trust. The second quote shows how uncertainty creates apprehension, especially when people don't know what data is being collected, where it goes, or what it might be used for. For many participants, the fear wasn't about the technology itself, but about the implications for whakapapa and collective identity. The third quote reminds us that colonization is not historical background, but a present influence. Participants described how past harms shape today's interactions with institutions and why mistrust is often inherited across generations. And finally, the idea of safety comes through strongly. Safety is not just technical or procedural, it's relational. It comes from genuine connection with whānau, hapu, and iwi, and from approaching this work with manaaki and care. So on to the second theme, which reframes digital forensic data as tonga, something that carries whakapapa, Māori, and ongoing relational obligations. Participants emphasized that data derived from tūpapaku is not neutral information. It is living, connected, and shaped by the relationship it holds. Because of this, data that contains whakapapa or personhood is inherently tapu. Its protection requires kaitiakitanga, ethical responsibility, and processes grounded in tikanga. Participants also reminded us that tikanga is not fixed. It adapts across hapu, iwi, whānau, and context, and must continue to evolve to meet the realities of contemporary digital environments. Modern expressions of tikanga, guided by values of manaaki, care, and reciprocity, are essential for safeguarding tonga in these spaces. We also heard that digital environments can function as extensions of tungaranga waiwai, a place to stand, helping restore connection, identity, and well-being. But this potential can only be realized when the exchange of Māori data is handled with relational care. So taken together, these insights show why tapu, kaitiakitanga, and tikanga must guide every stage of the data lifecycle, from data collection and access to storage, sharing, and eventual destruction and disposal. Again, some direct quotes for you to read, and I'll provide a brief overview that show just how deeply participants understand digital data as tonga. So these first quotes emphasize that when we talk about the data, we're also talking about identity and lineage. Data isn't separate from the person that it represents. It carries who they are. Digital koiwi presented as a photographic image, scan, or 3D model were described as having Māori that needs to be cared for until proper closure is reached. Participants also spoke strongly about ethical responsibility. Tonga shouldn't be owned or controlled by others. It has its own mana, and decisions around access must follow tikanga and involve the right people. Some information is inherently tapu, meaning protections and processes are essential before anyone can view or use it. The next set of quotes reminds us that tikanga is not one size fits all. It changes across iwi, hapu, and whānau, and must be shaped through early engagement and co-creation. This is how tikanga lives within digital environments. And finally, participants describe the potential of digital spaces to function like virtual whare mate or extensions of tōranga waiwai, places that reconnect people to whakapapa, identity, and to each other. The third theme looks ahead to futures shaped by mana motohake, or self-determination, partnership, and capability building. Participants emphasize that Māori authority, representation, and leadership are essential to ethical governance. Without Māori capability embedded throughout the entire system, decisions risk misalignment with the values, aspirations, and needs of iwi, hapu, and whānau. Again, 4 ideas emerged within this theme. The first was that Māori authority, Māori authority, representation, and capability, that Māori leadership strengthens decision-making. It ensures that governance reflects the cultural, ethical, and relational responsibilities carried by data from tūpapaku. Secondly, that governance must reflect tikanga, or specifically that tikanga grounded governance frameworks should exist. And these frameworks need to be grounded in Māori values such as manaaki and whanangatanga, and embedded across all stages of data creation, management, and use. The third is that true partnership requires navigating both worldviews with respect. Participants highlighted the importance of practitioners who can work across Te Ao Māori and Te Ao Pākehā, ensuring Māori perspectives are upheld within institutional structures. And the fourth is that decisions must uphold collective well-being and mana. Data governance is not just administration or administrative compliance. It is a shared endeavour, shaped by relational accountability and future impacts on whānau and community. Again, we've got some quotes to illustrate these 4 sub-themes. And these illustrate how participants envision futures shaped by Māori capability, tikanga grounded governance, and genuine partnerships. So this first quote highlights capability building. Participants stress the importance of growing a Māori workforce within forensic and digital fields so that iwi, hapu, and whānau are represented in decision-making. Without Māori scientists, analysts, and leaders in these spaces, systems will continue to reflect other worldviews by default. The second quote speaks to tikanga grounded governance. Tikanga isn't something added in at the end. It must be part of the design. Participants describe tikanga as a practice guide for shaping how systems function, how decisions are made, and how responsibilities are carried out. The third captures the challenge of bridging worldviews. Western models often treat data as separate or purely technical, while a Māori worldview emphasises whakapapa, relationality, and interconnectedness. Participants saw a real potential in bringing these perspectives together across courtrooms, agencies, and organisations, but most importantly, if the sector is willing to be brave enough. And finally, the last quote emphasizes our collective futures. Decisions about data have intergenerational implications. Participants stressed that these decisions must be communicated clearly to Whānau so that they can give informed consent, and that governance must prioritize what protects their well-being into the future. As we move from the themes and quotes into our interpretations, it's important to recognize how closely the participants' korero aligns with the Māori data sovereignty principles. Many of the concerns they raise around authority, whakapapa, obligations, reciprocity, collective well-being, and kaitiakitanga are reflected directly in the Māori data sovereignty framework. These principles give us the why data from Tupapaku carries obligations, why whānau consent matters, and why governance must account for relationships, mana, and long-term impacts. But participants also reminded us that Māori data sovereignty is not a checklist. These principles must be lived, relational, and embedded into everyday practice, not simply referenced in policy. They also noted that what they shared doesn't sit outside Māori data sovereignty. Instead, their insights sit alongside it, deepen it, and in some areas challenge us to extend it, particularly around whānau authority, tikanga as process, and the spiritual dimensions of digital tonga. So across the interview, several ideas sat beneath these themes. These ideas weren't driven by our questions, but emerged consistently and with real clarity from participants' korero. Firstly, participants were very clear that Māori data sovereignty is not a single position. Perspectives differ across iwi, hapu, and especially whānau. That sovereignty is relational, shaped by whakapapa, and not by fixed categories. And the quote here, which I think is an important one, so I'm going to read this out loud. Māori do not think the same. The idea that we can be all homogenized into one way of thinking about any kind of sovereignty is not true, and it's the same for data. Secondly, this very strong kaupapa cut across every interview. Whānau level authority. So even when we weren't directly asking about it, participants consistently returned to the idea that decisions about images, data, and digital files regarding kōiwi tangata and tupupaku should sit with the whānau, the people who hold the closest relational obligations. And the participant here says, the future is whānau data sovereignty. That's where the mana sits. Third, participants describe data as not only information, but as living and relational, carrying Māori, wairua, and whakapapa. That framing goes deeper than current Māori data sovereignty literature and has real implications for how digital representations of tupapaku are handled and protected. And this individual is quoted by saying, I think that we see that data of the deceased in the same way that we see data about the living. It requires the same level of protection, respect, and care, even to a greater degree because of the tapu nature of that data. And fourth, tikanga was spoken about as a process, not a principle. Participants describe pōwhiri like digital access, reciprocity, stage engagement, and ongoing obligations. Practice, operational tikanga that needs to be designed into a digital and forensic system. Again, the quote here is talking about being engaged early. And so tikanga is co-created or embedded within the co-creation from the start of the data systems and not afterwards. And finally, participant raised issues that Māori data sovereignty has not yet addressed, mainly courtroom exposure, digital storage with content in the filing system that is next to each other, which is inappropriate. We talked about museum handling or court storage handling and what dignity means when remains are represented digitally. As we've discussed, there's new ethical pressures that are coming to light through these conversations that are specific to a forensic data lifecycle. And this individual talks about whether we actually really need to show images in an open courtroom. Can we have a closed courtroom? Can we have something private instead? But more importantly, how are we caring for the whānau, for the dignity of the loved one who has passed? So this kaupapa calls us into action. What participants shared wasn't simply a critique, it was a guidance for where we want to move to next as a community in this forensic data space. We need to move from principles to procedures. That values alone aren't enough. We need tikanga grounded procedures for access, storage, deletion, and representation of digital data from the deceased. That governance must begin with the whānau. Those who hold whakapapa connection to the person or the data are the rightful decision makers. Any ethical framework must centre that authority. Māori capability and leadership must be strengthened. Participants were clear that Māori experts need to lead the design, oversight, and cultural safety of forensic data systems and be embodied within the forensic data collection and policing networks. Dignity must be protected across all forms of data, physical, digital, reconstructed, and any type of material derived from post-mortem examinations. Tikanga isn't an optional layer. It must sit throughout the entire data lifecycle. We need systems that are transparent and trustworthy, reducing uncertainty, knowing where the data sits, who is responsible, and what obligations accompany that. It is essential that we have this for relational accountability. And ultimately, all of this means slowing down at the points where care is needed the most and designing forensic processes that honour whakapapa, tapu, and the responsibilities that we carry as forensic scientists when we work with the deceased. So some closing reflections. I think I spoke too quickly because it's only just past halfway through, but leaves plenty of time for pātai and kororo afterwards, I guess. So as an anthropologist who has worked with the recent, historic and ancient dead for more than 20 years, I've learned what looks like just a photograph and just a bone is never only that, and it's certainly not how I see the world. The research that we've done has shown that for whānau, these photographs, digital representations of the tūpapaku of Koiwi are a living embodiment of someone that they loved. And in this way, this data, this digital data is not neutral. It carries the traces, relationships, and responsibilities connected to that person. So in closing, this kaupapa has reminded us that data from the deceased is never neutral. It carries with it the people, the stories, the families, the Māori, and the responsibility of those who embodied it when it was a living individual. What participants shared takes us beyond technical questions. They showed that Māori data sovereignty gives us the principles, but that tikanga gives us the lived practice. And a clear message across all interviews, as I've said before, was that whānau authority is central, and that really was a key theme coming across. And that ethical governance begins with those who hold the whakapapa connection to the tupapaku data. So I'll leave you with 3 final reflections here on the screen. Data from the deceased is not just information. It is tonga. It is not neutral. Trust is relational, not procedural. And our shared responsibility is to create forensic futures that uphold mana, dignity, and justice. So I'd just like to say a thank you once again to our participants who entrusted us with their korero. Their insights have provided not only guidance for forensic science, but a wider invitation for us all to rethink what care and accountability look like in a digital age. And I wanted to finally finish with a favorite quote of mine from Sir Mason Jury, who reminds us, ki te titiro whakamori I kitia ai amua. We can see our future behind us. And this is an invitation to pause, to look back at the journey that brought us here, and to carry forward the lessons of care, openness, and kindness. If we can acknowledge where we've all come from, and if we listen to the collective voices that have guided this kaupapa, then we can build forensic futures that are equitable, relational, and that sustain us all. Kia ora.
Thank you for that, Angela. So we've got time to take questions now. So we are being recorded, but if you just raise your hand, I can give you, unmute you and give you video time. But yeah, I just personally, I see there's a lot of value that's going to come out of this. There's going to be a lot of whānau who will have more trust with the system now, that our cultural beliefs will be respected. And and I hope that these findings will be implemented through more forensics around the country. Also, if you want to, you can just put questions into the chat room if you would prefer that. Okay. Oh, come on. Yeah, so there's a comment here from Jasmine, just supporting your corridor and saying it's good. So, thank you. So,
Cool. Yeah, I see the question. So thanks, Heidi. What are the next steps you'd like to see? It's a great question. I think having, well, it's easy to say more conversations, but I think that's what's necessary. Really what the research highlighted that is that, and the quote that I shared about having a very homogenized perspective on what the Māori voice is in these circumstances is not the correct way of thinking about data sovereignty, and really exploring what whānau data sovereignty would actually look like. I think what we're dealing with is very sensitive and tapu data, and that in itself, we have to be respectful of engaging the whānau with images of their loved one who is deceased, and how we can protect them in this way forward. So it's about having a bridging entity to really connect the forensic science and Crown agencies with whānau, and really get to the grips of kind of what is appropriate, and what a whānau data sovereignty system might look like. I see Olivia. Thank you, Jill. And Olivia's got a question. Kia ora. So thank you for your presentation. What do you see the governance role being? I guess government policy. We take guidelines in the way that we do our work from legal policy, and I think that the government will have to decide the correct way of doing things in terms of the Crown agencies who go out and collect the data and store it and give access to it. They are really the key stakeholders in terms of allowing that system to develop. And so it would be great to see the government running some initiatives into what that framework might look like, and to start those conversations at that higher level in terms of co-designing systems with tikanga embodied within a forensic data governance system. So hopefully that answers your question, Olivia. There's another question from Finia. How will forensic scientists manage the violation of tapu and tikanga in reality? Is it creating standards? I mean, from my perspective, forensic scientists are very special people who do a really hard job dealing with the end of life, which isn't so great. So with high-profile crimes, with death, with identification of the deceased, and the scientists that I know don't do that work lightly, and they don't take it for granted, the privileged position that they're in. And so I wouldn't necessarily think that there would be a violation of tapu and tikanga from their perspective, but I'm just wondering whether that's really what you're meaning, Finia. Is it creating standards? Not too sure about that. Karatiana, can you help with that question? Is that my interpretation correct of that question?
Yeah, I think you were right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And I think that forensic scientists really they do the work for the Crown, for government agencies, and so really how they can implement their own guidelines and workflows as independent practitioners or within independent agencies, but our directive really comes from the higher level governance that is needed in policy. We've got another question from Nuro. The point of Māori not being consolidated into one voice, what would be the best way to navigate this in larger data contexts where it's not necessarily feasible to gain consent or engage in discussion with each individual whānau or wider? Absolutely. I think it's an excellent point. We have to at some point draw the line on on opinions. We're all individuals. Every single one of us has a difference of opinion. We have a different opinion to our brothers and sisters and to our parents and grandparents. And so I think it's just having an open, continuous, safe place for a dialogue to continue those questions and to adapt and change the discourse as we're moving forward in terms of new technologies and how we're really transitioning into a digital space that none of us have really navigated before. So it's an important way to have conversations. And I guess the point is having them. I think at this stage, I'm not sure that we're really starting that conversation. I know these perspectives from Aotearoa, having an Indigenous perspective and voice is quite unique on the global stage. And many of these technologies are being implemented across the world without those cultural and ethical conversations being had. So I think it's good just to start the conversations at this stage and keep on going from there. And Linda, thank you. Yeah, she mentions that there's a complex issue and it all comes down to whānau, and that's exactly right. It really did. And Fiona said, was there anything in the research and conversations that surprised me? Not surprised me. I guess the one concept that I really enjoyed that came out of the conversations was the idea from one of the participants that the data is held within a digital whare mate. So at the moment, you know, data from the deceased has not got a single place where it sits. It depending on what it is and what it represents of the individual, it is in various places. But having a single repository, a digital whare mate, where you would you know, engage with tikanga in the process of entering that whare mate and the work that you did, and then leave it with a feeling of safety with as a researcher, but also as a scientist, and anybody who has access to that information, was something that really I appreciated coming out of those conversations, and I think that that is something definitely for the future that can be brought back into conversations about what this looks like in terms of governance and policy frameworks. Kia ora. Are there any further questions that you can write in the chat if you like,
or perhaps even if you want to turn your camera on, I can unmute you from here if you want to just orally ask a question. I've got a quick question for you, Angela. Is how do you talked about the lack of Māori forensic scientists? So what can we do to encourage younger Māori to study and get into forensic science?
Oh, I could do a plug for my summer school. No. But yeah, I mean, I think that what forensic science is actually, what I love about forensic science is that it does contain the hard sciences, but it also is a way of thinking, and that's how I teach my students, is that forensic science is critical thinking, and once you are exposed to different opportunities. I mean, we have elements of forensic science that get taught in high schools. At university, there are limited options, but there are a couple of undergraduate courses available at Otago and the University of Canterbury, and then there's postgraduate instruction at the University of Auckland as well. And I think the framework itself is lacking. In some ways, compared to my experience of the forensic science world in the UK, compared to New Zealand, is that we have a lack of crime in New Zealand, which is not a bad thing, but it means a lack of jobs, and it means a lack of opportunities to flow into that workforce. But it's about finding a mentor, finding somebody that you feel safe to work with and to guide you into that space as well. And a real passion. And I've known many Māori students through my time at Otago who have gone on and gone into the world of forensic science. But I think if we had more professions that or professional opportunities, there'll be a higher level of Māori workforce. Again, going out to communities, doing forensic science outreach at the marae or in at schools would help with engagement. I think there's the barriers of potentially the unknowns about what forensic science is Potentially the word science is a bit overwhelming in terms of the technical knowledge needed. But really it's about the way you think, and about reflective critical thinking that can really be showcased to Māori students to really get them engaged in the process. Cool. Are there any more questions?
Kia ora, Angela.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, my name's Jessamine Whānau. I wanted to ask, can you see potential for when this framework is eventually developed and is being used to help guide how people interact with our people's data sovereignty in this space, that it would be transferable knowledge for how our people are interacted with in regards to data sovereignty in other spaces, especially in regards to our health system, for dealing with, well, as our people present, for example, at hospital. And the reason why I ask this is because, I'll give you an example. My daughter, we were at hospital just a week ago, and we were asked to prove our citizenship. My daughter was born at that hospital, and for some reason they decided that they needed further proof of citizenship, even though we're Māori. So it's interesting to me that that's happening in this time and space with Trump and all this other stuff happening, and the influence of external policies happening overseas on our own government's policy frameworking. And I just wanted to see how you think this might be transferable for other areas of knowledge in the health system.
Kia ora. Thank you for your patai. I think, in all honesty, the governance frameworks around Māori health data are way more advanced than what we've done here. In so many ways, where the data from the living has been considered, and there's there is policies that exist as procedures, guidelines and government frameworks around Māori health data, whereas we're just starting the conversation of what it means regarding data from the deceased. And so in so many ways we could potentially learn from those other frameworks. But I think what was really clear that came through with the interviews that we did was that the frameworks are great, and they're great to understand the who, but they don't like the who does these things and how it happens, but they don't really embody how it's done or provide any formal kind of direction into the nuances of and specifics of what needs to be done in this space or these spaces. And so I think that's probably a decision for those agencies in charge of how they handle that data to start implementing guidelines. It's very difficult to kind of work from the bottom up, if you like. It would be good to kind of hear from the top and start these processes. But I think just providing awareness, creating conversations and dialogue are the first steps. And I really think that if we start sharing this work wider, that maybe, as you said, other agencies and governance frameworks could actually take stock of the findings that we've shown and shared, and the interpretations that we've given. I think that's there's a lot to be said for understanding data as tonga, but actually kind of laying out what that really means in practice and how we actually hold that within tikanga responsibilities and processes, and how that data is carefully managed and stored. And potentially this can work, we can develop this further in the forensic world that can lead into those other systems that exist. And as as many of our participants have shared with us, that data from the deceased, from the tūpapaku, shouldn't be considered any differently from the living. But the only documentation we have in our country with policies and guidelines is specifically about living data. So we need to kind of shift that focus and lens to talk about data of all people, and move forward in that way.
Kia ora. Thank you.
We've got about 3 minutes left if anyone else has any questions. And just a reminder that this will be uploaded and available at youtube.com/ktaiuru, and a copy will also be given to Angela, which I'm not sure if you publish it somewhere, but it'll be available. And there was such huge demand for this, we basically met our maximum tickets very, very quickly. So I mean, maybe we could talk about maybe another one next year. I don't know, but we can please. Sorry, I'll just throw you under the bus there.
Yeah. No, it's good. We can expand on it, I'm sure.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yes. Great. Excellent. And great. Okay. Well, I think yes. People saying thank you in the chat there. So what I'll do, I'll push stop recording now.